Welcome to Meditate to
Hello,
Create.
Saskia.
Hello,
It's very
Terry.
nice to be here.
I'm Saskia. This is Terry Clancy. He is a self-help author and a narrative meditation practitioner. So we'll get into that, of course. Narrative meditation and meditate to create. But Terry was a mental health nurse for 38 years.
Yes.
Correct? 38
Yes.
years. Working with people who had mental and physical disabilities.
Yes.
And that's sort of where the story begins. And I thought for episode 1, we should really delve into the early years of Terry Clancy. We really want to explore your life and how it all began. Will you tell us a little bit, Terry, about your background?
Oh, well, I was born in Sydney. My family lived in Darlinghurst, which was sort of right next to King's Cross. So I learnt to walk in the back streets of King's Cross, actually. And we moved to Brisbane when I was about 8, 9 years of age, at the outskirts of Brisbane, a place called Mount Gravatt, where my formative years were. And they were good years, actually, very good years. Yeah. So I went to state school there, Upper Mount Gravatt State School and Mount Gravatt High School. Eventually went to Griffith University, studied at Griffith. So I stayed in the area there, on the south side of Brisbane, for quite a while, for about 30 years actually, maybe longer. Yes, and then I moved up the Sunshine Coast. I retired and moved up the Sunshine Coast. Place called Mapleton. Yes.
Place called Mapleton, magical place. And how did you find those formative years in Darlinghurst and then in Mount Gravatt in Brisbane? How did they form Terry Clancy as a person? Was there anything in particular about Darlinghurst and Mount Gravatt?
Well, Darlinghurst was a really working class area at the time, a very working class area. This is the 1950s, very working class area. It had everything actually, but you were close to everything. You were close to the city and the harbour and Taronga Park and Luna Park and Manly. It was a wonderful place to grow up actually. Bondi, museums, botanical gardens. It was all very close. It was very good, but it was very much a working class area, terraced homes. And there were a lot of different people. Yes, there were a lot of returned soldiers from the Second World War living there, and a lot of people who had mental illnesses actually in the area.
Did you realise that at the time, at your age, or is it...
No, I didn't realise that.
Now, looking back, you
Looking
realise?
back now, yeah. They were very odd people, actually. A lot of odd people. That was just normal. They were part of the community.
And your parents, so it's a working class area, assuming that your parents were working class
Oh, yeah.
as well?
Oh, yeah, my father was a wharfie. Oh, yeah. He worked on the wharves in Sydney. Yeah.
What roles did both your father and your mother play in forming the Terry Clancy that we see today? As we know, our parents,
Oh, yes.
they mess us up in some way or another always, don't they? So how did yours
Well, they say
help you grow?
we're born to our parents for a reason. In Buddhism, they say that, yeah. My parents were opposites, actually. They were opposites. My father was a 6'4", cane cutter, timber cutter, My mother was was 5'3", very quiet person, very quiet, placid person. I had to resolve those opposites, I suppose. That's the answer to your question myself. I had to understand the differences, They were together, they were married for 60 years as a loving, devoted couple. But I couldn't quite understand my father at all. He was very authoritarian. That was the culture, I suppose, the roles at the time. They had very rough upbringings, and my family were, they established cane farms in North Queensland, on the banks of the Russell River, which were pretty much the frontiers of Western society at the time. It was a very dangerous place, full of crocodiles, and it was jungle. And so my grandfather, who was an Irishman, came out here when he was 9 on a sailing ship, and eventually, yes, they got given land up in North Queensland.
Was that sort of the promise to come?
Yes.
To Australia, you were given land, right?
They were indentured. They worked on things like the railways, building the railways, and eventually they were given land in North Queensland.
Not the easiest place. Is that when they then called all the cane toads in?
The cane toads came later, I think. Yeah, so it was pretty harsh environment. They had to be resilient people.
So that resilience turned into a more authoritarian father. Authoritarian to yourself and your brothers and sisters, or to your mother? Was there...
Oh, yeah.
Also to your mother?
Oh, yes. Never physically violent towards my mother, no. But physically aggressive towards the... that was a culture. That was just a norm at the time, yeah.
So, growing up, did you find you were connected with your mother more, assuming, than you connected with your father?
Yes, that's right. Couldn't really communicate with my father, no.
And the communication with your mother was free-flowing? Did you ever feel sort of resentment towards her for not standing up more to your father, or was that just not a thought in your mind? She couldn't have really done anything.
It wasn't a thought, no. The male father, at the time was, wasn't questioned really. That authority wasn't questioned. But I eventually did question authority, yes. Yes. Yeah.
And do you think if it wasn't for your father and your mother and that upbringing, you wouldn't have gone into mental health? Do you think that was a pivotal
I think
reason?
So, yes. It was about wanting to understand psyche, our inner experience, how we can create our experience.
And of the four of you, the four children, are you the only one that sort of went on this journey, this meditative self-awareness journey, or do you also have brothers, sisters that also looked a little bit inward in life?
No, they weren't interested really. It was just myself, questioning things and wanting to live differently, I suppose.
That brings us on to the next point. You played AFL for the Mount Gravatt Vultures.
Oh, yeah.
And won 2 premierships.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, we were good.
How was that?
Yeah, well, that was a long time ago. So the Mount Gravatt Vultures involved all the local kids. It was really good.
But then the next chapter was a little bit wild and free in the late 60s, early 70s, as we saw around the world, obviously. Woodstock and Vietnam and all these things happened. So you then started a little bit of an alternative lifestyle, alternative Terry. Tell us a little bit about that time.
Well. The 60s, yes. So if you remember the 60s, you weren't really there. It was that time. Motorcycles, riding down to Nimbin for the weekends. Yes, it was flower power. It was 1967. I went to a talk with Maharishi Yogi, who was a guru at the time. He was a meditation teacher to the Beatles, George Harrison, etc. So he was in the Theosophical Society in Brisbane, visited there, and gave a talk. I think, I was 14 at the time. Yeah, so it was interesting. I didn't understand him at all, really. But anyway,
but very memorable. That's quite something to have seen him. So, and obviously something that has stuck out in your mind, even though you say you didn't really understand him. But again, obviously reflecting back, would that have been sort of the start or the pivotal moment, do you think, in your meditation journey? Would you call that sort of the beginning?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It was his presence. I didn't understand him. What he was talking about. He was talking about Atman. He was talking about Atman, the individual self, and Brahman, the collective self. And developing a self-awareness. And of course, I had no idea what he was talking about, really, because we were doing pretty well. Everyone was doing pretty well here in Australia. We had a few. Well, we weren't aware of all the problems. Aboriginal people had huge problems, but we weren't aware of those things. Mm-hmm. We were doing okay, so why do we need to change? Didn't really understand why we needed to change. But yes, he was a very interesting. He had a fantastic presence, and I suppose that started my inner journey myself. Developing awareness, and that starts. Our story begins with consciousness, really. So that's our life story. So we're developing our awareness, and then you consciously try to do that through using different methods. So meditation, developed my interest then. Well, it was really the Beatles, really. They were pushing it along, introducing meditation into the West. We had no idea what it was, so we wanted to find out. So it was growing interest, how to improve yourself.
Oh, you were involved, obviously, at the time in South Africa. Apartheid was happening. Vietnam was happening. There was a lot going on in the late 60s, early 70s, and you were involved in quite a few protests during those times. So one was the anti-Springbok. So being South African, obviously something that's really close to me as well. That's, I believe, really did play a part in the end of apartheid, was that South Africa wasn't allowed to play international sport, and there was a lot of pressure from the world, which was good. Was sort of the beginning, and you were involved in one of these anti-Springbok protests.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. Where was that?
Oh, well, yes, it was the anti-Springbok protests at the exhibition ground, actually, yes. There were people running onto the field and, throwing flares, and there was a demonstration at Tower Mill Hotel one night when I was there. Which was,
he briefly says, I was there, and then something interesting happened there. We'll come back to that. It was the 60s, so he doesn't remember, though, what happened. There was also Vietnam moratorium protests.
Yes,
remember
that's
that
right.
one?
There were quite a few very large demonstrations, well, the largest in Brisbane's history, really. So there'd be marches from Queensland University into the city along Coronation Drive. And school student, high school kids were involved, and I was a high school student at the time. Yes, involved in the protests because we thought it was all wrong. And, there were 500 Australian young men got killed, which wasn't good. And Vietnamese people were suffering a lot. We wanted the war to stop. Eventually it did.
And these protests at the time, do you remember feeling at all scared? But obviously your belief was more powerful. I just think as a high school student, maybe would have been a bit scared. Were you scared of the authorities? Were the authorities present at these protests?
Oh, yeah, definitely were, yes. Yes. The Springbok tour, yes, there was a police baton charge on the demonstrators at the Tower Mill Hotel, which wasn't good. Yes, it was all part of movement, protest, so it had to be done, really, and just raised awareness, and we wanted, the Springbok tour to stop, really, as part of supporting that what was happening in South Africa. Yeah.
Do you think there was a connection there at the time between looking inward and being more empathetic?
Oh, yeah, that's right. It was part of the hippie movement at the time, the counterculture, really, that we were, a global community, and everything was affecting everything else. So environmentalism became a very strong movement at the time as well. The peace movement, environmental movement, then there was the other drug scene as well, of course, which was a different way of raising awareness, opening the doors of perception. That was also, at the time, although I didn't get involved in that.
Of course not.
No. Well, it was America was a big Timothy Leary.
Oh,
that's
yes,
right.
yes.
It was advocating psychedelics.
That was also for mental illness patients at the time, I think, as well.
Yes.
And of course the Beatles, it was all the same time sort of coming out with...
Yeah, developing awareness, opening the doors of perception. Yeah. And then there was meditation as well, through Maharishi Yogi advocating transcendental meditation as opening the doors of perception through meditation.
Introducing meditation to the West, which was in the late 60s, sort of via the Beatles. Was there any awareness sort of around meditation in the West before then?
Well, in monasteries, going back, 13th century, yes. Meditation was practiced as a devotional practice. It was the practice of monks, etc., part of their devotional practice of connection with a deity. So there was different approaches to meditation, yes, Maharishi Yogi was spiritual practice, devotional practice. So there was a bit of a problem there, of course, about learning meditation if you weren't part of that religious beliefs. It was connected with religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs. Yeah. So it was a bit of a barrier there. Maharishi Yogi, yes, it was about his spiritual beliefs. So accessing meditation was connected with beliefs, which is true, it's very true, but perhaps there are other ways of accessing meditation rather than spiritual beliefs.
Fascinating. From those sort of early alternative time, and you then decided, okay, I need to eat food and maybe put a roof over my head and get a job. So
yes.
That's how we buy stuff.
Reality,
it's very unfortunate. Yes, reality. So you decided to study mental health nursing at Wollston Park Hospital. Is that where it began?
Yes.
And why mental health nursing? Do you remember the moment where you thought, oh, Terry, this is what I want to do?
Well, friends. Yes, friends got me involved, interested in it. They were mental health nurses, yeah. In Sydney, actually. They were working at places like Gladesville, Callum Park, and Broughton Hall in Sydney. And so I was living in Brisbane, of course, and so I went to work at Wollston Park Hospital. It's 1974.
1974. And why Wollston Park?
There were circumstances. I had friends who were working there.
Was it a mental health hospital at the time, or did it just have a mental health unit?
Oh, no, it was a psychiatric hospital from 1865.
So a proper psychiatric hospital.
Oh, yeah.
So why nursing and why psychiatric nursing?
Well, I thought I'd find out. I'd learn a lot. I did learn a lot, actually, from working with as a mental health nurse. They say, it's a two-way thing. We're helping patients, but also we're gaining awareness ourselves. We're getting something out of it ourselves. And, I did get a lot out of it myself. So, yes, it's a whole learning experience, a very good learning experience. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I will,
Especially not in the 1970s and 1980s in a psychiatric hospital environment.
Well, strangely enough, it was a very supportive environment, strangely enough. But it was how to exist, how to work in this environment. That was a bit of an art in itself.
What do you think in those days, it probably rings true today as well, what are some of the key attributes that somebody needs in order to be, never mind a nurse, but a psychiatric nurse? And why do you think you at the time thought, okay, I have these attributes, this is something that I can do?
You had to develop compassion, empathy. You had to develop empathy and compassion with patients, yeah. You had to. That was your job. It was forming the therapeutic alliance with people, connection with people.
And when you embarked on that journey to do your 3-year apprenticeship, nursing apprenticeship, did you know that was something that you could definitely do? Or were you a little bit unsure and thought, let me try this? I don't think at the time you would have thought, okay, I'm going to do this for 38 years. Or did you?
Well, I enjoyed forming the connection with people, with the patients. I enjoyed it. Yeah. There were a lot of people who were very much institutionalised, had serious mental illness for a long period of time, 30 years, 40 years, who were institutionalised, but I could form a connection with them and help them with their lives, and I enjoyed doing that. This was an institution, it was the asylum, which was started to undergo changes in the 1970s. Yeah.
And you were part of those changes?
Yes, happily.
And that we will discuss more in episode 2. Can't wait to find out all about that. Terry Clancy, thank you.
Thank you.